Okay, so I have a little After Effects puzzle here. So I'm working on this basically kind of a lower third graphic for Corey Cranfield's new show, Shed Logic, and I've got two versions here. Got a red version and a or a red version and yellow version, and it's a little cumbersome to have to fill this out. So I'm going to try to automate a few pieces of it. So that way it can just be an essential graphic kind of thing where the text is editable and everything falls in around the text, including a little bit of animation. So I'm going to try to figure that out real quick. So we have a couple of parts here. We have the stripes, which just use a repeater to move across. We have text and we have the box. So first, what I think I'm going to do is attach this stripe element off to the corner edge of this box. I think that's our primary goal right now. So I'm just going to do it to the red box for now. We'll pretend that this version does not exist. There we go. By hiding them. There we go. They don't exist. There's probably a couple of ways to do this. But we have to recognize that this box will change sizes over time. So we're going to go into our stopwatch here. We're going to do a very simple expression, xy, because that's what it has to output. It has to output an x value and a y value. Then we need to define x and y. So x equals something, y equals something. For right now, we're going to do value 0, value 1, which should mean that nothing has changed. Okay, great. We don't have to worry about the black stripe because it always follows the yellow stripe. So we just have to make sure that the yellow stripe lands in the correct spot. And there is a little bit of wiggle room here. We just want to make sure that red doesn't poke through. That's kind of how I currently have it aligned. So I kind of like that range, thereabouts. So how do we programmatically figure this out? Okay, so first we want to point to this layer. We want to establish that as T, which is my target. Then we're going to do this comp dot layer box red. Okay, so now every time I type in T, it's going to reference that layer. So for the X value, I think what we want to do is we want to move this, the position of T dot position X, no, not X, 0, which is the X value, or it's the first value. Okay, so let's start there. Oh, good grief. Do we have like a weird anchor point? We do. Okay, so I'm going to set the anchor point to 0 on both of these. Oh, there we go. Okay. So now the anchor point should be actually in the center. That's something you can do for box objects, but you can't do for like a line object. Okay, so that's nice and simple. Let's go back to position. Okay, so it is at the position of this, theoretically. I was kind of hoping it would point it to the center, which it does not. Can we do source rect at time, rect at time dot. So I know you can do height, do top, you could do left. So let's do left. Let's move it to the left. Okay. So we're going to do left plus source rect at time dot width. I think that's the thing. So that should put it right here on this far right edge. That seems okay. Then buff, which is my buffer, minus buff. Might be a little far, but now I'm going to push it down. So we're going to do something very similar for the y value. Y value is the source rectangle at any given point in time. And we're going to do, I'm just going to confirm that I can't do bottom. Can't do bottom. Okay. But I can do top. So it's up here at the top now. Plus the height, which effectively gives us the bottom. So it's the bottom. Now we are going to minus buff, just to kind of put it equidistant on the interior. I could totally get away with doing nothing for the buffer, putting it in this far corner. The only reason I'm not doing that is because I want a little bit more of this yellow stroke to appear through. I don't want just like a little tiny sliver. So, I mean, we can just kind of keep pushing this out until we hit that edge. And the stroke is a 100 pixel width stroke. So in order to like find the true thing, you kind of had to do some Pythagorean theorem type stuff to, you know, to figure that out. But we're just gonna do the coward's way out, and we're gonna do trial and error. Okay, I think that looks fine. I might actually just visually, I think 30 might be a little bit more balanced. At 35, this almost feels too wide, even though functionally it's exactly the same width as these. But 30 feels a little bit better balanced. Okay, so I like that. Now let's test it. We're gonna go to size. We're gonna just manually readjust the size and see if it matches. And I forgot to hide these layers properly. Okay, look at that. It moves along with it, and it's always latched on to the right side of this asset. That's great. That works exactly as intended. Now we have to worry about this text here. Now this is kind of designed to be a one-line asset. It's not really designed to break off into a second line. So that's maybe a problem I will have to solve in the future. But for now, I'm keeping it one line. So what are we to do? Well, I think first, we should attach the text to anchor the text to basically the left alignment and then give it a nice padding. And then after that, what we'll do is we will dynamically adjust the size of this box to the text, to whatever the text, the length of the text. Okay, so how are we to do that? Well, we're going to do something quite similar to this because, you know, kind of a similar problem to solve. So our anchor point, so we basically have it, if we're going to have it left aligned, we should left align the text. So that way our anchor point is on the left side. That'll just make my life a little bit easier. So 0, 0 is on the left side at the bottom. I think it's on the baseline, right? Yeah, so it's not actually the bottom, it's at the baseline. So where the text should theoretically go, but some characters can extend below the baseline. Think of like, you know, a lowercase j or something where the loop goes down beneath the baseline. We're going to go into position. We're going to do another XY. Those can of course be anything, but X and Y is pretty standard. Okay. Y equals whatever. Now something we could also do is we could build the values 0 and 1 into each of these terms so that if you wanted to, you could manually move these around and it would stay attached to the side that we're attaching it to, but you would have a little bit of customizability in the future, but I'm not really concerned with that right now. T equals, I'm just gonna copy this. You know, I'm just gonna copy the whole thing. And we'll sort it out later. Okay. Great. Perfect. Working as intended. So instead of pushing it all the way to the right, we're going to push it all the way to the left. And the top left. Sure, why not? That's not great. Okay. So is this attached to anything? No. Okay, that makes sense. This layer is parented to the box. So let's parent this to the box. Okay, now it's starting to make a little bit more sense. All right, so that, parenting it to the box changes our coordinates relative to the coordinates of the box. So that shores up this, that puts it up here where we do not necessarily want it. So let's work on the y value first, because the x value is pretty close. It just needs to be padded out. The y value needs to, the y value needs to add, because we need to pull it down. We need to add half of the height, so that way it's centered. So dot height, but then we're going to do parentheses just to keep things nice and clean and organized, divided by 2. Now, it's not exactly perfect, and the reason for this is that our anchor point is at the baseline. So we're going to dynamically adjust the anchor point. So we're going to do x, y. Of course, we have 2 values here. And we want x to be 0. Right now, we'll just make both 0. Okay. And then what we want is we want the y value to end up at the halfway mark. So for the y value, we're going to do this layer dot source rect at time, our best friend in the whole world, dot height divided by 2. But it's going to push it down, which we don't want. So we need 0 minus that. Right? Am I wiling? Am I out of control? So we're close, but we're not quite there. And that's because we started at 0, which is the baseline, which is not the actual proper bottom. Although with this text, I feel like it's closer to the center than it would be with the proper bottom. But if we wanted to fix that, what would we do? Would we do this top minus height to get to the bottom, top plus height to get to the bottom, and then subtract half of the height? Oh, I guess we could just do top plus half of the height, right? Maths. How do they work? Yep, there you go. Now it's in the proper center. All right. So now, if we wanted to sort of see this in action, we're going to look at the size. We're going to pull it down until it gets to, wow, look at that. Look at that. That's a pretty close match. I mean, it's a perfect match. It's just that this particular font has some little quirks to it. But otherwise, that's great. That is exactly where we want it in Y space. But we still have X space. We still have the horizontal to figure out. But that should be quite simple. We just want our little buffer here. And we could just do plus 30 or something here instead of going through buff. The only reason I do buff is it was especially useful with the stripe because we wanted that margin on both X and Y space, and I could just change the variable and it updates both. Whereas here I'm only updating the X variable. So it's not as useful, but it also keeps things a little organized sometimes, depending on how your brain works. Let's do 150 maybe. That looks kind of nice. Yeah. So we move this around, and now we have the assets on the right side. The asset and the text are both perfectly locked in place. You love to see that. And then let's go through and change the size of this. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Text is perfectly in place. The stripes are perfectly in place. Wow. Beautiful. You love to see it, folks. Well, we're not going to change the Y value. So now we need to dynamically change this size. So that shouldn't be too difficult. We, again, have X and Y. And what we're going to do, well, we need to define X and Y, of course. Value 0. Y equals value 1. This is always just like good practice, in my opinion. Just so that way, you know, you make sure that everything's up and running. Okay, so Y we actually don't want to change. We can leave it as value 1. So that way, if you want to go in and manually adjust it, you can do so. I wouldn't recommend it though. X value, we are going to change based off of this. Okay, so there's going to be, I could do some maths here, but I'm just going to kind of go by eye. So we need to first establish where our target is, which is going to be this text layer up above. So this comp dot layer, purchase PVC parts white. And let's actually change that. We'll just say text. It's the only text on screen, right? And then this automatically updated to it since we've already kind of linked to it. It's very helpful. So we established this as a variable because this is what we're going to be focusing on for our dynamic changing. So what we're going to do with the X value is we're going to say t.sourceRect@time, of course, .width. So now it's going to be a perfect match of the width, which is not what we want, but it'll get us in that direction. And of course, it is offset by, what was it, 140 pixels? What's our buff? 150. This might be a little overkill for what we're doing here, but you can link to, so first of all, plus 150. But you can link to that variable if you really want to. It's a little difficult in After Effects compared to something just like JavaScript, where you have like a global variable that everything can pull from. But you can kind of work your way around it by doing a slider control buffer. We're going to do 150. Then what we can do is we can go to our position. And instead of defining buffer here, what we're actually going to do is we're going to pick whip it over to this slider value. I'm going to make sure to put in dot value at the end. So that way we adjust this and adjust that buffer because it's pulling from that. Now this slider we can actually reference in other layers. So instead of plus 150, we can say, I always forget the syntax for that specifically. So pick whip is your friend. All right, so now we increase. Oh, that's okay. Unintended consequence. So that's a thing that's not really helpful, right? Because if you're increasing the box width as you're increasing this margin, then it's not gonna stay at the same margin level, right? That should have been anticipated, but anyway, that's a thing you can do. So let's just go ahead and do plus buff, and we'll just do our own local buff. We could do buff is this dot value plus something else, right? So we don't need to actually affect that, but then let's do 200. So now we need to figure out that amount on the other side. So actually we should probably do times 2 because we want that the same on the other side. But then we also need to approximate the width of this asset. And this is the part that I said, you could probably get into it with maths and specifically pointing stuff out. Each of these stripes are 100 pixels wide and they're rotated at 30 degrees. You can figure out exactly what the width of each element is, and then you can integrate that in a more dynamic way. So that way you can add or remove stripes if you really wanted, and it can adjust to that. That's too complicated for what I'm going for here. Whoa. Okay. I'm just going to do that. Okay, that looks pretty close to what I want it to be. Let's maybe do like 550. You know what? I'm going to go back to 600. I like having just a little bit of extra space over here. Okay, great. So now what we have to do is we have to put this to the test, of course, by changing the text. Wow, that's amazing. And it perfectly adjusts to it. And everything is pointed at the box, so we just have to make sure that the box is centered on both axes. Now for this composition size, I basically have it chopped down to 4K width, but then the height is approximately the height of the graphic. So that way when we're over here, we can move it around and it's pretty much the dimensions of the graphic. There is no way to dynamically adjust the dimensions of the composition in After Effects based off of asset width and height, but you can kind of get around it a little bit if you basically have a layer that, we kind of strip all of this out of there, and this is just comp width. And you can kind of keep this over in the corner. X, Y, Y equals this comp dot height minus this layer dot source rect at time dot height. So that should put it like right at the bottom edge. And then X, actually I don't like defining Y first, X equals this comp. Oh no, X equals 0. Which should put it on the left side of the comp, the way that the, oh, why did that not work? Just that? Okay. Oh, yeah. For some reason, I was thinking the anchor point to the text was in the top left corner in the same way that it is for the composition, but it's the bottom. So I could just do height. So yeah, the coordinate system on the composition, 0, 0 is up here in the top left corner. If you wanted something down here, put it 0 for X, and then for Y all the way down by doing the comp height. What this allows you to do is you can go into the text, the source text. We can say this comp dot width, and it'll just tell you the pixel value of the width of the composition. But that's not helpful now that I read that out loud. What you would actually want it to do is you would want it to do the width of this asset, so that way you could change the composition width. So all we really need for that is this red box. So we're going to do T equals this comp dot layer box red. So what we want is T dot source rect, of course, always, dot width. Oh, and then, yeah, okay. So this, all of these decimal places are not super terribly helpful. So we can do math dot floor, math dot round. Let's do round. It actually probably makes sense to round up, but we'll just round. So it rounds to the nearest pixel, or it rounds to the nearest integer, right? So this gives us a pixel value that we can set the entire composition to. So we can be like, oh, width of 1651, and then it perfectly matches this. Oh, and you could also look at the size here if you really wanted to. But this is useful if you have like something that's complicated, like some assets that are attached to the side or something. It's more than just one object. You can make an expression to take a look at those. Instead of 5 to 80, let's make this like 500. So then we could do a comp of 500 height. Something that would be helpful for this in particular is we could make this change colors if it does not match. Animate, fill color. Yeah, I don't know exactly what it wants here as a value. Oh, actually, okay. No, here's what I'm going to do. So we don't need this if it matches, right? So we'll just tell the opacity that, hey, if you match the comp, have an opacity of 0. Go fully transparent. Otherwise, be fully opaque. So if it matches perfectly, if this asset and the comp width match perfectly, it hides itself. It goes away. If it's not a perfect match, then it shows up. And it's always on screen, and it always tells you the number that you need to punch in to perfectly match. 3055. Look at that. Beautiful. You love to see it, folks. A system comes together. Did not intend to do that. Purchase PVC parts. 28.39. All right, well, that's going to do it for that. If I make it into an essential graphic, I'll probably just take this away, and I'll probably just give it like a long width. Maybe like 4,500 pixel width or something. If I do something like that, I might even push the box so that it's always aligned to one side or the other. So that way over here, if I sort of have a templatized version of this, I can line it up on the right side, let's say, and then it will always be aligned on the right side. In fact, let's do that now because I feel like that's a more practical solution than this. If at any point somebody else has to mess with these assets, it'll be less work for them. So let's go ahead and make this oh, good Lord, 6,000. So that way it can be quite long, but not too long. So we'll just get rid of this. I love that idea though. I've done similar things as that for Emergent Beacon. I do stuff like that for my citations because this is a very similar sort of setup to the way I handle citations on that show. Okay, so we're going to have this box and we're just going to position it. And of course, X and Y, none other. And so this comp dot width, this comp dot height divided by 2, is that right? Yeah, because it's 500 height. This is 250. Okay, so we're going to do minus. We need it to move to the left. And it looks like it's right in the halfway point of this layer. So this layer dot source rect at time, very useful, divided by width, divided by 2. Okay, and I'm going to space this out just for visibility. Oh, would you look at that? And so now I go in here, I do this, and over here, now, hopefully, yeah, look at that. Yeah, that works great. And then so what I can end up doing is when I turn this into an essential graphic, I can basically take this property, add it to essential graphics, move it over here, and then anytime we need an element like this in Premiere, you can just copy and paste it, edit the text, and it'll all move around perfectly. Now, I did mention earlier that I was considering doing some light animation, which I legitimately forgot about until 10 seconds ago. So let's see if we can figure out what that is. It might also be worth doing like a 30-degree angle slant on this You know what I mean? Let me see what it would look like though. Would you please? Why are you not? Oh, it's probably transparency bound. Yes. So it'd basically be like that. And then you would fill it in, which actually I can do. Fill it in. Fill it in with red. Update, please. There we go. Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna have to sit with that. But until then, we can do a little animation. We can maybe have these like kind of slide in. So I'm thinking like a 2-layer slide. So basically we have the stripe slide in first and then the red slide out next. I don't know if the red sliding out reveals the text that is stationary or if the text is attached to the red as it slides out. I'm not sure. One thing at a time. Okay, so we have to be a little clever about this. This is where value 0 and value 1 are really gonna pay off, because we could animate the values and then we just have to make sure that everything else works. Here's what I'm gonna do to hopefully make things a little bit more clear. X anchored. Or X dynamic. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to branch these off into different variables. So that way I don't have to deal with them at all and they stay constant. Okay, so we're going to do plus value 0. But now we need to make value 0 actually 0. And we need to do plus value 1. Actually, y doesn't need to change at all. Now that I think about it, we're just sliding it in from the side. So y can stay as is. So I'm actually going to just branch off x. Okay, so everything is still working. So now what we do is we keep this. And actually, I want to set that to 0 just to set my mind at ease. So we are going to, let's do a 12 frame animation. That'll be nice and simple. And then we're going to animate it off. There you go. I don't expect the stripes to change width at any point in time or amount of stripes. If I did, I would have to make this even more complicated, but I don't. Okay. Great, so those animate in, and basically at frame 0, it starts 715 pixels to the right of wherever the edge of the screen is. So even if you change the width of this composition, it should still work, I would think. Then we eased it in. Now this is important for any sort of motion graphics work. Go into your speed graph. And give it a good influence. Hell yeah. All right, that's a bit fast. So I want to make it a 1 second animation. Nice. Now what might be interesting if we posterized it. So that way we basically convert it to 8 frames per second. All right. I love posterizing whenever I can. The problem is there is a very tricky balance between looking artfully posterized and looking like a graphical error, looking like you just screwed it up. In this case, I think I'll leave well enough alone. I don't know that that's necessarily helping tell the story I'm trying to tell with this through this show, but it's something I often try to check because I use it a lot on Emergent Beacon, I use it a lot on Modern Rogue, and I think it's a nice little style touch if you can find the right way to implement it. Now we need to animate the red box. And we'll do so quite similarly. So again, we do not need to adjust the Y in any way. We'll do X dynamic. We're going to do 0. Great. We'll do a slight offset by 4 frames. So that way it starts before this one finishes. Oh, bit tricky that, because everything is attached to it. An interesting problem. Because even if I break it off into like a null and I animate the null and parent this to that, if this is moving relative to the box, then it's going to move as well. So I think what I really have to do is I have to animate the box, and then I have to counteract the box animation with this animation. Well, no. Okay. So now that we've established that everything is anchored to the right side of the composition and it's not going to change, we're not going to mess around with the composition width or anything. This really doesn't need to be attached to the box. It needs to be attached to the comp. Instead of source rect at time.width, T can basically point to the comp. This comp dot left. Actually, I don't know if that works. This comp dot width should work. I don't think left works. Yeah. Can I just do this? Oh, good grief. Oh, well, hold on. Okay, we're going to unparent that. Oh, I might be making a real mess of things. Okay, hold on. Hold on. Okay, one step at a time. The height is fine. Okay, so I'm going to do this and it's going to break it, which is not ideal, but it didn't break it as bad as it was broken earlier. So let's start with fixing Y. This comp dot height should put it, okay, nice. That put it back in place. Okay, let's change this to what it should be, and then we can reevaluate position, keyframes and stuff. Okay, so the X should be just comp width. Nothing fancy about that. This comp.width minus buff. And then it's plus the value, so the value must be like way high. 0. There we go. I think I was making that way more complicated than I needed to. So let's do 0, and then we can just slide it off again. What was it, like 715 or something? Wow, look at that. Great memory. Good for me. Okay, so now they're decoupled. That's good. It's good. And this is where it's going to land. And then this needs to be slid all the way off the edge. Oh, okay. So these were transparency bound. The reason for that is that the comp was not perfectly matched to the asset. I didn't want stripes going off the edge of this red box, but now that we literally don't see past the red box, it's not an issue anymore. Okay. And then we will easy ease that. We should probably double check these just to make sure, or these, I should say. Just make sure that influences are still approximately where we set them. What was it, 80? Was it 90? 80. 80. Yeah, it's not the fanciest animation I've ever had.
Out of this, going to the larger.
Let's check to make sure that this works with different text widths per parts. So this is instilling confidence, the fact that it has not broken after the animation. What about before the animation? Oh, okay. So that's a little troubling because it works fine for smaller texts, but for larger texts, it will not work. Okay. Okay. I think there are ways in expressions and scripting to assign certain values to certain keyframes. I do not know how that works or how to do that, how to even approach that. So I've got to figure another way around this. Okay. I've got an idea. So I'm going to do a slider control. Animation. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to animate from 0 to... No, we're going to animate from 1 to 0. Okay. 1 to 0. That's our animation. We're going to ease that, and we're basically going to do the same value, or the same sort of shape as we did for position. Now what we're going to do for this is we're going to say the X should not just be plus value, because we don't actually want value. We kind of want the size. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we don't want value. We want size width, which is size 0. But we want that to be multiplied by our animation value. So basically it is being multiplied proportional to where in the animation it is, I think. Oh my God. Look at how good that is. Now we don't even need this. I don't even think that does anything. Yeah. Okay. So if we look at this, our X dynamic basically says, hey, go all the way to the width and then go back half of the width of this, right? So it basically takes the center anchor point and pushes it up to the right side of the comp. And then I tell it, no, push it back so that take this amount and push the whole thing that way. So that way the right-hand side of this box lands on the right-hand side of this composition, right? That's what X dynamic does. Now what X does is it says, okay, that's your position, but I also need you to go to the right the entire size of this box, right? Which puts the left-hand side of this box on the right-hand side of this composition. So it's 1 pixel away from anything being seen. But I need you to multiply that whole amount by the slider value. So when it's animated away, it's multiplied by 0. So the left-hand side is aligned with the right-hand side of the comp. It has not been pushed over to the left any amount, but once it's multiplied by 1, the whole thing is all the way out and it's perfectly visible. Whew. Okay. Maths. And so we change that and it's perfectly aligned, no matter what we put into here. Unless we did a second line. If we did a second line, then it's kind of broken. I mean, it still works. That animation portion still works. It just, the graphic doesn't work. It does not look right. And again, we could fix that, but that's not germane to this conversation. Okay. Oh, and we should probably animate it away as well, right? So we'll just do the same thing. There we go. Okay, we're gonna animate from 0 to 1. Get rid of that ease so it just flies out 80%. We're gonna go a couple extra frames, and then we're going to animate this as well. it's going to be 715, just as it was before, even though that's probably a little bit further than it needs to go, but that's okay. 80%. Yeah, so this, I feel like it could be timed a little better. Here, let's move our work area. It's close, I suppose. And then move our work area over here. So earlier, something I was mentioning about this animation is, and I kind of landed on this because it was easier, was that the text is kind of still anchored to the red box. You could do a kind of thing where the text isn't parented or something, and it's stationary here, and then it's set to preserve transparency. So that way it would basically be transparent until the red box came underneath it and revealed it. But that is actually, in a lot of cases, that would actually be an easier way to go about things. But in this case, it's already attached to everything and nicely proportional and everything. So I do not think that is necessary. Also probably wouldn't look as good, but that's always an option. In some cases, that will look nice.
Backside of the disc.
Yoink.
Going to the larger storage tanks.
Wow, look at that.
Our storage tanks for the pressure.
Wow. Now for making it longer or shorter, basically what I would do is I would, in my template, so I'd basically go to frequent use. I have a sequence for stuff I use often. What I would probably do is I'd probably go, okay, so 1 second 5 frames is when the animation ends. So I would move this to 1 second and 5 frames. So now there's a cut here. And then the other one is the last 8 seconds, 20 frames. So let's find that. 8:20 right there. So I would bring this down. You've isolated the animate in and animate out portions of this sequence. And then you would just go in and you would say, add frame hold. And so this is now a static object that can be extended however long you need. And you would just add the animate out at the end, and you would add the animate in at the beginning. That way you can make it as short as, 2.5 seconds, or you can make it as long as 5 hours, or however long you actually want it to be.
Okay, so now it's a week later, and I had an idea for this. So I added a little visual black bar here on the left side that sort of tracks along with it. That was pretty simple. But instead of having 2 different motion graphic templates, one for a red color palette and one for a yellow color palette, I figured I would just combine them into one. Shouldn't be too hard to do. I went and looked up what it expects for color data. So to start off, let's go ahead and get a null in here. Okay, and I'm going to call this my controller, and I'm going to hide it. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a drop-down menu, and we're going to change the names of these to be red and yellow. Then we're going to get rid of the third one because I only have 2 color palettes that I'm really looking to using. Palette. Now this is really useful because in our essential graphics, when I'm going to save this out, I need that to be an editable thing. So that way we can just come in here and move it around when it's in Premiere, just like the text currently is. So now we just need to be able to change this drop down and have it actually change the color. So let's start with this box. I think that'll be the most visual and apparent change. So we're going to go in here to fill, and then we're going to alt click on our color expression, and then we're going to do an if else, of course. If else, and then close it off. Okay. So let's go ahead and come up here. And before we get into the if else, let's start defining some stuff. User C for user color. Let's pretend like that makes sense. Let's go ahead and open this up, and then we're going to pick whip to that. Yeah, I know. It doesn't like that. Okay, and it's going to be this dot value. These drop-down menus, regardless of whatever you label them as, this number is actually the value it spits out. So if you have red selected, the value is 1. If you have yellow selected, the value is 2, and so on. So right now, user C is a value of 1. Actually, let's do uColor. I don't know. You can make it whatever you want, whatever makes sense to you. Okay, uColor equals 1. Then do something else. Do something else. RGB equals this, I suppose. So then HSL equals RGB to HSL, and then we're going to put RGB in there. We're going to do H equals HSL 0. S equals HSL 1. L equals HSL 2. So basically, I've taken the RGB value of this, I've converted it to HSL, and then I've broken up the HSL components into their own respective variables for hue, saturation, and lightness. I'm going to come up here and change this because that's how my brain works. I change variables over and over and over again. Then we're going to do color output equals HSL to RGB, and then we're going to put HSL in there. Break these apart so that way we have the new HSL values. Color output. If, color select. Got to update this because I changed my variable. This needs 1 argument, so we're turning that into an array. Although I think it needs, it needs an alpha amount at the end, and it's on a scale from 0 to 1. All of these are on a scale from 0 to 1, so we're just going to say full alpha. Okay, so we're ending with color output, which is going to be here. So if color select is 1, which is red, then we need H will equal 0. That should push it to red, right? Maybe let's go ahead and do this afterwards so that way, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so basically the problem we're running into here is that it is outputting our color output variable, which is defined back here. And even though this if is changing the H value, which we can barely see here, good grief. Even though it's changing this H value, it's not updating color output because After Effects is funky. So we're just going to, instead of defining that back here and recalling it, we're just gonna output that. And it's not even gonna be a variable. And hey, look, it's red. It's not quite exactly the red color that I wanted. I think maybe because saturation is not all the way up. I think I might have done a full saturation. Let's pull this up and let's just see exactly what this color is.
Okay, so this color is, oh, it's a bit of a quirky one. Okay, so we have our HSL over here, 7 degrees, so it's not a full 0. Unfortunately, because this is from a scale of 0 to 1, we have to do 7 degrees divided by 360, which will give us like 0.05 or something. It'll give us like a very small amount, but that gets us in the right hue. And then saturation is 76. So that is 0.76. And then our lightness is 47%. So 0.47. We're pretty close on that. Okay, and that doesn't quite look right though, does it? What do we have for yellow? Oh wow, that's aggressive. It's almost a lime green sort of color. Almost. So we can just kind of do the same thing over there as well. You know, I might be tempted to do like a sort of a switch statement or something, since that's really what's happening here. But if else is going to work fine because there's only 2 options. So else is just going to be, you know, if color select equals 2, which is yellow. So we just need to define our hue, our saturation, and our lightness. So I'll just copy that over. And then let's go ahead and swap it to yellow. And we have 58 degrees. So that's going to be 58 divided by 360. Got it to that yellow. Nice. 79% saturation. So slightly more saturated. Nice. And then 60% lightness. So 0.6. That really doesn't look right. Is it calculating lightness differently? I guess now that I think about it, do I even necessarily need this stuff? I could just have the HSL convert it to RGB. So yeah, I could actually drop all of that because I'm just converting these numbers into RGB and then outputting it here. But the question is, why does this look so far off from this, which is what it should be? So yeah, here's the unaltered version, and we can see that it is quite different. So what we could do is we could just keep it RGB. And if we just keep it RGB, then theoretically it should be an exact match instead of jumping across different color spaces and stuff. So you could do RGB, RGB. It's a little less intuitive, but if you just got the values right there anyway, then it should be okay. And then we don't need to convert here. And it's not going to like that, of course. So 255, which is 1. H is not defined. Oh, right. Yeah. R, G, B. So R is 1. Or at least it's 1 when we're trying to define yellow. In fact, what we could do is we could say yellow option, red option, 248 and 53. 8 and then 53. 53 divided by 255. There we go. That's an exact match. I don't know what I was doing wrong on HSL, but you know, hey, so it goes. Just to keep things a little bit organized, I'll do 255 on that as well. There, now it's all nice and even. Now we just have to figure out red. Okay, that's the red. That's the full on. That's the red. Boy, we got that red. Okay, so 218, 46, 23. 218, 46, 23. All right, divide all those by 255. if I hide that and I change this over to red. Ah, beautiful. Okay, so now this drop down changes the background. That's a great first step. Next, what we will do is change the, I guess let's change this stripe. Should be fairly simple. Can just kind of copy all of that expression text. And let's see, color. We're going to go to stroke. And we're going to paste that in, which is not exactly what we want quite yet, but it at least gets things changing. So when it's red, I need it to be yellow. That should be fairly simple. I can basically just swap these. There you go. Works like a charm because it's the same yellow as the box. Now when it's yellow, I need this to be white, which isn't that just 255 all across the board? Because it's maximum brightness. Hey, would you look at that? Wow. Brilliant. And then the last bit is just the text here. And that should also be hopefully fairly simple. So we're going to animate with fill color. Ooh, RGB. Hue. What? Let's just do RGB because everything is already set up for that. Okay, so instead of full brightness on yellow, we want it to be black. So minimum brightness, zeros across the board. And then we want it to be black when we go to our red color palette, or we want it to be white when we go to our red color palette. So 255, 255. Hey, is that right? Yeah, look at that. Wow, incredible. So now we go over to Essential Graphics. And yeah, I think this is good to go. Yeah, that seems about right. And it all still animates together. It's nice. We only have to have one essential graphic instead of one for each color palette, which is great. We have our text here. We have our color palette. Okay. Let's go ahead and set our poster time so we can see it. And then export that. Yep, go ahead. Taskbar. Don't know why there's a space in that. Taskbar. Beautiful. Now let's go ahead and get rid of red, get rid of yellow. We no longer need them. Okay, I can go ahead and delete both of those. Import taskbar. Ooh, ooh. Okay, pull this over here. Cut there. Cut there. Line it up. Delete all this. Add frame hold. We need it to be quite a bit smaller. And then we want it to sort of line up with this bottom margin. All right, great. Now copy and paste this positioning for the other pieces. And now I should be able to change the text. Change the text. It follows along with it. Change it to yellow. Wow. Look at that. Brilliant. You love to see it, folks. Incredible. Now, I would still have to change it for these other parts because I've cut them, but that's great. So now we've just got one taskbar. Love that. All right, that's going to be it. Thanks for watching.